Light is something we probably all take for granted, yet it is one of the most essential aspects of our existence. The light in our homes that accentuates the beauty and atmosphere of a room, the light of the sun, the moon, and the innumerable wondrous stars are all quite familiar to us, so much so we hardly take notice of them. And yet, when we try to comprehend the light, it turns out to be a great enigma, a wonder, a mystery, both a particle and a wave, the physicists tell us. And what of the light of stars that are so far away? If light has a limit to how fast it can travel, that means that when we behold distant galaxies and nebulae in the deepest parts of our universe, we are actually looking back in time, as those objects appeared hundreds of thousands, millions, or even billions of years ago. But what if you are a Christian who believes the universe and everything it contains was created approximately 6,000 years ago? How can one even begin to explain these vast distances to other celestial bodies if the universe has only been around for a few millennia? On this month's episode of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, we discuss this very question with Answers in Genesis astronomer Dr. Danny Faulkner. Danny begins with what the Bible says about creation and the stars. He provides us with several creationist views that have been put forth over the years, and offers his own particular thesis on what is known to creationists as the light time travel problem. So whether you are a Christian or a non-Christian, let there be light. Join us for an enlightening and illuminating edition of the Atheist and Christian Book Club with astronomer and author Dr. Danny Faulkner. Here is the host and co-founder of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, president of Watchman Fellowship, James Walker.
Welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club. We are a monthly gathering of both believers and skeptics, respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. I think we have a great club meeting lined up for you guys. My name is James Walker. I'm president of Watchman Fellowship, an evangelical apologetics ministry defending the Christian faith, primarily focused on interfaith evangelism, interacting, reaching out, having conversations with those of other worldviews, other religions, other spiritual paths, and we reach out to them. And our other co-founder, who's running a little bit late but will be joining us later, is Bill Cluck. Bill Cluck is a former Christian, now atheist, and is going to be joining us here in just a little bit. So we have, I think, a great club lined up for you guys. We do have, again, we alternate books. So last month we did an atheist book, and this month we are doing a Christian book. And we are very privileged to have with us the author of that book, Dr. Danny Faulkner. The book we're looking at is The Created Cosmos. Dr. Faulkner holds an MS in physics from Clemson University and both an MA and PhD in astronomy from Indiana University. He taught for, I think, about 26 years at the University of South Carolina, Lancaster, and he currently serves as editor of the Creation Research Society Quarterly and has published over 100 papers in various journals. He now works primarily as a researcher, author, and speaker for Answers in Genesis. Dr. Faulkner, welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club.
Thank you for having me. Well,
we do have already some questions lined up and coming in from the moment we announced that. I'm not seeing, is Ken in here with us yet? I do see Ken. Yeah. Yes, Ken. Ken was here. The first one, I think, that had a great question. We are going to get to you, Ken. Don't worry. That's I want to hear the answer to that question. I know many others do as well. Ken is a former Wycliffe missionary, former Christian, now atheist or agnostic, and he's one of our longtime faithful club members here at the Atheist and Christian Book Club. Well, Dr. Faulkner, I want to say, coming from a Christian perspective, reading your book, a couple of things I really appreciated about it is you very clearly laid out kind of your hermeneutic, how you interpret reality. And you're looking, I think at kind of that very common, two books or two sources. You have, special revelation with the Bible. You have natural revelation with, the observable world and what we can learn from science. But you clearly kind of ordered how that goes and what takes priority. That you first are going to look at special revelation, the Bible, and secondly, looking at science to see how that validates and verifies what we find in the Bible. And you differentiated that from people that maybe start with what they can observe in science and then go to try maybe pick out some passages or verses that seem to validate things that science has already taught them, and you kind of reverse that around. And I think the hermeneutic or how you interpret that is really essential into how your views are going to develop on that. So if you could just take a few moments and share why how you place the Bible and how you weigh things is what we can learn from observation, what we can learn from creation versus what we can learn from special revelation. Could you take a few minutes and do that?
Yeah, I think the Christian, the worldview ought to be that the Bible comes first, God's revealed word to man. That's one of the foundations of Christianity, that God has revealed himself specially to us through his word. And you mentioned what we call the dual revelation theory, that God has revealed himself specially through the Bible, but also he reveals himself through the creation, at least something about himself. That's talked about in Psalm 19, also in Romans 1, 19 and 20. One of my complaints that people have, some Christians, I see them, they would disagree with me perhaps, but I see them taking what they think they're drawing from general revelation, using that to reinterpret Scripture or interpret Scripture in terms of what they think they know about general revelation. And the problem with general revelation is it's kind of vague. Romans 1, 19 and 20 tells us basically two things that general revelation can tell us. One is that God exists. Number two, he's very powerful. But beyond that, it doesn't really tell you very much. And you need to go to special revelation to find the really important things that we need to know in life. So
similarly, even if you look at the special revelation and divide it between the testaments, as far as specifics of theology, the triune nature of God, let's say, we would look at all of it as inspired in special revelation, but we would say our hermeneutic is going to be usually the New Testament is best to interpret the Old Testament. And it's more, like you said, more specific, more detailed than the earlier revelation. So, what we can glean from natural revelation or general revelation is certainly true, but it's not special revelation. Yeah. And it doesn't give the specifics. So, and you were going to say something else, I think.
Yeah, and Psalm 19 makes it very clear that what general revelation tells us is nonverbal. And that's key because we sometimes, and I use an example of speaking and my wife's in the audience, and or maybe I'm just out in public or some sort of social setting, and I get this look from my wife, and it's not a good look. And I know I've either done one of four things. I've either said something I shouldn't have said, not said something I should have said, done something I shouldn't have done, or not done something I ought to have done. That pretty well covers it. But the problem is I'm a man and I don't know which one of those four. And it's not until later when my wife tells me, specifically what the problem is, that it gets through my thick skull and I get it. So I much prefer the specific verbal sort of communication over the very vague nonverbal. And that may be a poor analogy, but I think the same thing is going on here. We can misread the quote unquote book of nature. We can't even agree many times on what the body of that knowledge is or what that information is. When it comes to special revelation, though, at least we can agree it's the Old and New Testament. We may not quite agree on the meaning, but we can't disagree on the words, I don't think. And so that's why I'm saying we need to, it's better to interpret the vague and nonverbal in terms of the specific and verbal than the other way around.
And thanks for laying that out at the front and kind of establishing how you arrive at what you do. I think that's very helpful.
And Danny, just to set some groundwork for the book too, because there may be some people that weren't able to read it, but your book, you wrote this because, as you said in the intro, there was no book that was doing biblical astronomy, which is basically, as you said earlier, looking at Scripture first about what Scripture says, rather than about what nature says. But you said that there was what was it, like a century or more since?
The last book dedicated to that was really in the first decade of the 20th century. Walter Maunder, who was an astronomer, English astronomer, did work with sunspots. He wrote actually a very good book.
I have that. It's good.
And I would disagree with him about some stuff. Part of it's just a product of his time, but very good read, very well done, I thought. I just thought it was time after more than a century to kind of update the thing. Also, Schiaparelli was Italian. He wrote something about the same time on the Old Testament alone. And there have been a few books since then that wrote kind of about that subject, but they weren't really exhaustive. Sometimes they'd write a book dealing with astronomy. There was one written in 1979 by Paul Steidl that dealt with the sun, but that was not the main thrust of his book. So I did do a follow-up book a year later to it, talking about what I would call the creation science of astronomy. I tried to avoid that in this particular book. And so I just wanted to update that. Yeah.
But it's interesting too, for in-house for Christians, there really isn't. I mean, helped write a book on the universe, and as I was doing research, there is not a plethora of books out there coming from a what does the Bible say perspective. Rather, a majority of what you've seen in the last 100 years or so, even for evangelicals, is what does the science say? Let's see if it fits the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got that exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we try to come with all kinds of different perspectives. We have atheist authors that are mythicists that we'll bring on to defend, their books. They don't believe that Jesus ever existed. And then we have other atheists. Bart Ehrman was one of our guest authors with us last year, who is a agnostic, certainly, but absolutely believes Jesus existed and is quite adamant about that. So that kind of divides the atheist community a little bit over that issue. And then, from a Christian perspective, the vast majority of the Christians in our book club are going to, have doubts or concerns about the theory of evolution, particularly common ancestry and things like that. However, one of our first books that we did, or I guess that was actually about halfway through the book club, but one of our books was Francis Collins' book, The Language of God, in which he is, an evangelical Christian that holds to evolution in probably kind of any sense that most atheists would, I would say. So we also brought, and what's the guy's name that was the Discovery Institute, the atheist guy? You remember? We had one author that we dealt with, one book.
Oh, David Berlinski.
Yeah, Berlinski. He's certainly an agnostic, not a Christian, but he absolutely does not believe in evolution. So we try to kind of mix it up and break down the stereotypes that all Christians are going to always believe the same thing, all atheists are always going to believe the same thing, and we try to look at all perspectives. So the first book we actually ever did in the book club was what was that, Privileged Planet? Was that the name of it?
Privileged Planet with Guillermo Gonzalez?
No, I'm sorry. It was the one with
it was Francis Collins?
Hugh Ross.
You're right.
Yeah. Can't remember the name of it right now, but Hugh Ross's book is basically definitely old universe from a Christian perspective. And I know you're friends with him and you've had some discussions back and forth. I don't know if were they debates, would you say, or were they just discussions? Could you tell us a little about your relationship?
Well, a little bit of both. We have a very good relationship, actually. We don't get upset with each other. I know some people, my colleagues in the recent creation movement, tend to be a little rough with him, and I think that's bad. We've had two programs, I guess you could call debates, where we kind of squared off. But yeah, I mean, I respectfully disagree with him. I don't doubt his salvation. I just think he's wrong. He makes sure people understand he is not a theistic evolutionist. He promotes progressive creation,
Right.
which is a bit different. You didn't say that, I know, but some people might think that.
No, I'm glad you made that distinction because, and that's the general point I'm trying to make is it's nuanced and, just like probably no two atheists agree on everything, maybe no two Christians agree on everything either, and that's one thing we're learning in our book club. But also what I like about that is that you can have a discussion without compromise and really put your position out there, but do so in a loving way, respectful. And that's another thing that we try to emulate in the book club. So I used to say that we're always friendly, but some of the atheists said, well, James, we're beyond being friendly. We are friends. And so, in fact, I'll tell you guys later about a experience I had just 2 days ago with our co-founder, Bill. I'll wait for Bill to get here to tell you about that, or he might want to even tell you about it. But definitely friends, but we're on opposite sides of the issue, and we definitely wanted to get a different perspective than that as well at some point in the book club. So at least talking about the age issue, which you do in your book. This is probably the first book club that we've clearly had that perspective. And one of the things that has come up in several of our book clubs, as well as off club discussions and all that we have, is the issue that you spend a good deal of your book dealing with, which is the speed of light and the problem with the distance or size of the universe. And I want to say, first of all, I really like the way that you handled that. You did not make a caricature of the positions that were not yours, which is always a temptation to do. I think you, what we would call steel man them and not straw man them, and I like that. So as you talked about the problem of the immense distance of how many millions of light years the stars appear to be away from us, you didn't minimize that or say, oh, that's no problem, nothing to look at, move along. No, you said it is. I think you called it the number one issue with the young universe position, maybe the objection you hear most often and stuff like that. So I also like the fact that you when you dealt with the different young universe ways of dealing with the issue of the speed of light and starlight and how we're observing things that appear to be millions of light years away, you seem to also, you kind of fairly laid out and gave all the strengths, but then you didn't stop there. You came along and said, but I guess you kind of were saying, here's why I'm not really convinced of that. And then, of course, you held off your what you feel to be the best answer to that whole question till the very end of that section, which happened to be yours. I noticed it was happened to be your position on that. So, and I do want to spend some time on your position. But before I do that, would you mind, just for those that may not have had time to read the book that are here, could you go back and just talk about what the problem is, just very, very shortly, why it is an issue that evangelicals, but believers, Bible-believing Christians need to be aware of and need to be able to know what their position is and why. So what is the time, speed of light, distant problem?
Well, simply put, we believe that the world is only thousands of years old. That God made everything in 6 days, as said in Genesis 1, and that was not very long ago. 6 normal days in the chronologies and genealogies in Scripture. It's about a little over 6,000 years ago, and yet we can see things that are very far away, much more than a few thousand light years away. The most distant object people can typically see with the naked eye is the Andromeda Galaxy. I've seen it many times with the naked eye, and it's a little over 2 million light years away from us. And I believe that distance is pretty close to being correct. It's a real distance. It's not a fake distance. and that's quite a bit more than 6,000 light years. So it's a pretty obvious question there, a problem. If everything is only thousands of years old, how can we see things more than, say, 6,000 light years away from us? That's about as simply put as I can make it, is the light travel time problem.
Yes, and some of the ways that young universe creationists have tried to address that. I think you went through about more than half dozen of different ways of, that fully mature. Well, let's just could you just kind of give us a thumbnail?
Yeah, well, one very popular one that I subscribed with for quite a while is what Henry Morris called mature creation. That God made the universe fully mature, and so that implied that He created light in the process of coming to the earth. They note that God did not make man a baby, didn't make him an embryo. He apparently was a fully functioning adult, and Eve was a fully functioning adult. And I think many people would argue that in creation itself, there's an implication of time, maturity, as it were. When Jesus changed the water into wine in Cana, that seemed to imply that the wine had been around a while. It takes a while to grow the grapes, ferment the juice, and so forth. Another suggestion deals with relativistic effects. Russ Humphreys was the one who nearly 3 decades ago first pioneered that. By the way, Russ has moved on to what I call Humphreys 2.0 and then 3.0. He's actually has 3 different models, and he doesn't really support his first 2 anymore, but many people don't seem to realize that. And then Jason Lisle took a slightly different approach, what he calls ASC. It's again a relativistic solution. I believe John Hartnett for quite a while was pursuing another relativistic solution, but he's given up on that and kind of endorsed Jason's idea. Barry Setterfield, 35 years ago, was suggesting the speed of light was very great early in the creation, has been decaying, actually kind of exponentially decaying, and he thought that he had physical evidence to support that contention. Those are the main suggestions people have made, and various creationists have endorsed one or other versions of those over the years. And I can see strengths of some of them, I can see weaknesses in them as well, which is why I've struggled with this problem for probably 30 years, trying to reconcile it. It was probably about 15 years ago, I guess, I began to finally cogitate on my own approach to this, my own solution to it, what I call the Dasha solution.
Well, let me ask first of all about the fully mature. I had dinner many years ago, I guess now, with Ken Ham, and he came by to see me here in Arlington, and we went out to dinner, and this whole topic and subject came up, and to be honest with you, I deal with interfaith evangelism, so I don't spend as much time as I should, working through what the latest, developments and all in this whole area. So I was talking about the appearance of age. In other words, if you see Adam in the Garden of Eden, on the day he was created, you're going to say, okay, he's about 20 years old, 25 years old, but it's the appearance of age. And Ken said, well, it's not the best way to say it. You want to say fully mature, because appearance makes it look like God is maybe not shooting straight with us or something like that. But you talked about one of the weaknesses of the idea that the fully mature. I'm not sure if positive it was that one. You talked about is that the theory where the light is already created in transit, so to speak?
Yes.
So you're not okay. Well, and you talked about one of the challenges with that theory was that the light from the actual star would in almost every, if not every case, never actually make it to Earth during the time of human consciousness. So all you're getting is the light. You're not getting any light that comes from the actual, and you actually can do away with the stars because all you need is the light. Saying that they're there, you don't even need the stars. Could you talk about that just a minute?
Yeah, it would seem that, for instance, I mentioned the Andromeda Galaxy. Unless you believe the universe is going to be around for another couple million years, which I don't think it will be, then we will actually never receive any light from the Andromeda Galaxy, and it's the closest galaxy of any size.
Actual light, actual light. It's going to be the light that was created in transit, but not any light that actually emanated from it.
Yeah. So most of the universe need not exist at all. It's just some sort of hologram, if it were, or some sort of illusion, which I find most unsatisfying. But even more than that, it's not just a matter of the appearance of what you're seeing. People get hung up on what we can see, but as an astronomer, observational astronomer, I see detail information inside of those. For instance, for more than 4 decades, I've been studying eclipsing binary stars. These are 2 stars orbiting around each other under their mutual gravity, and we're near the orbital plane, so we periodically see one star pass in front of the other. And you may wonder, well, why study such things? Well, it gives us a direct way to measure the sizes of stars. We can also actually infer a lot about their masses as well. So there's a lot of nuts and bolts astronomy we can gain about stars we can't get any other way. Plus, these are binary stars are sites of some very interesting astrophysical processes that go on. So binary stars are really important. Well, most of the stars that I look at are just a few hundred light years away, which is not really a problem with what we're talking about here. But some of the people in the field, the people I know, colleagues of mine, they have used the HST to study eclipsing binary stars in the Andromeda Galaxy. What they're trying to do is you get a direct method for getting the distance to the Andromeda Galaxy. By the way, I would add that the distance they're getting is at the variance with the other methods, which is interesting. It's not a huge difference, but it's a troubling difference. And if putting this all together, if that mature creation idea is correct, then my colleagues are looking at evidence of physical processes that never took place.
They couldn't have, because that light couldn't have gotten to us by now.
Right, and so what was God doing there? Playing around with creating this image as if these things had taken place when they really hadn't. And that troubles me.
You took it one step deeper too. That we're looking at approximately 6,000 years after creation. But what did Adam see the next day, the night after he was created? So
that gets me down the road to my solution to this. I point out that people fixate on the most distant things in the universe. How can we see them? And I said, well, turn it around. Look at Adam early on in the history of the world. His problem is seeing anything outside the solar system, because the nearest star is more than 4 light years away. And so if you look at his problem, then he didn't see any stars until 4 years and about 3 months, and then think one star and then another star and another star. And I don't think for a minute that's what happened. Because
why don't you say why that just doesn't seem likely at all that God would have done that?
Because at the end of the creation week, God pronounced it all very good. And the very good has the sense of meaning that everything that was God made, he made to fulfill certain purposes and functions, and they are doing that. Everything is functioning the way God intended it. And on day 4, there were a number of purposes given to the heavenly bodies. And in order for those purposes to be realized, then those heavenly bodies had to be visible. So I think when Adam looked up at the end of day 6, beginning of day 7, he saw pretty much what we see today. And so I tell people, if we can solve Adam's problem, how he got the light here from the nearest stars, I think that would also solve our problem of our concern with the most distant things. You got to look at the near and the far in order to get the proper solution, I think.
Well, I've still got a lot of questions, but I'm going to let some other people have some questions. But don't remember, I might come back to you because I've got a bunch of questions for you. But I did want to give Ken Daniels a chance to ask you. I think you maybe have already hinted at maybe how, or at least you've hinted that you are aware of this problem. But I want Ken to articulate it and be able to ask you directly. So, Ken, would you mind unmuting and joining us?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks, Dr. Faulkner, for gracing our humble little club with your presence. I might want to punt on this until I hear more. I confess I only had a chance to read a quarter of the book so far, so I don't speak from knowledge about your position. So it sounded like you summarized the position of several other recent creationists, but I didn't hear your position yet. I was wondering if we could get that first before I offer my question.
Yeah, Ken, I think that would be good. Maybe it would be best because the question may or may not be relevant depending on when he sees how you resolve that. So,
right.
Ken, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. We can do that. So,
all right.
Dr. Faulkner, talk about the if you can about the theory, the young creation theory of the speed of light not being constant and how that may help resolve the issue, but then it itself raises, I think you did a good job of talking about other problems that does create when you deal with the speed of light being not constant.
Yeah, well, that's not my solution, but I'll talk about it. We usually call this CDK, CDK for short, and it's the idea that C, the speed of light, has changed over time, exponentially changed. Barry Sutterfield pioneered this in the late 1980s or mid 1980s, and he dug up some historic measurements of the speed of light going back to Romer, which was mid 1600s, I believe, and then others coming a bit later. And what he found was that the speed of light then what they measured was greater than the speed of light today. He took the measurements over the time and he plotted them, and he plotted time this direction and the speed of light vertically. And when he plotted them, the first ones are up here and they're down, down, down. And when he ran a curve through it, it looked like an exponential decay, which then kind of flattened out about 100 years ago, which I think is quite peculiar that it flattened out about 100 years ago. But he believed that was his argument that showed this to be the case. I got a lot of excitement from creationists back in the late 80s, early 90s, perhaps. One problem comes to mind immediately is the earliest measurements were subject to the greatest amount of error. Generally in physics or astronomy, we put error bars in, how much error you have, and I thought it would be a vertical line like that, to show. And if you put proper error bars in the early measurements, they get smaller as time goes by because the technology has gotten better. And when you plot those, and I can look at that and I can run a horizontal line through the data, showing showing no change at all. So I don't think the error analysis was done properly. But even more
about that earliest reading, which was the most the different was the greatest on that first one, and that almost certainly he didn't have the use of a regulated clock at that point.
Well, yeah, and even interestingly enough, Romer didn't actually derive a speed of light from that. It's people after him that did. He was just trying to demonstrate the fact that the speed of light was not infinite, which was the debate at the time. So the early points are extremely important, but subject to the greatest amount of error. But even more problematic is the fact that the speed of light is not an arbitrary constant. It depends upon two fundamental parameters, what we call the permittivity and permeability of free space. If you change those much at all, you will change the structure of matter and everything changes. And that would seem to leave an imprint on distant objects, the spectroscopy, and we don't see that. Barry Sutterfield has attempted to explain that by tying it to some other phenomenon. It's got a nice little tidy package, but I'm not convinced by his argument at all.
Yes. Danny, would maybe this is getting too complicated, but along the lines of dealing with the speed of light, with the discovery of quantum mechanics and the superposition of the wave-particle duality, is there any help for a young Earth position in what quantum physics has uncovered about the wave-like nature of light, where light can be in "quote-unquote" two places at the same time, or is that?
I don't think so. I think I can't see how that possibly could work out.
Just curious. I don't. Yeah. I'm not a physicist, but I thought, well, interesting. But okay.
Yeah. Well, I would like to, if we have time, come back to some of the other possible ways of dealing with that and what the strengths and weaknesses are. But let's just jump ahead to the what you would say is the best solution, which is you worked on very recently, and this is something that you did arrive at, maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago?
15 years ago, perhaps. It's in the first decade of this millennium, I guess. Okay. I can't remember the exact time, but I cogitated on it for quite a while, and I got to thinking particularly, I dwelled on day 3. That's the day that God made the dry land and the seas and then plants. And, I'd read that passage many times. And I think it's in verse 11. It says, and God said in King James, let the earth bring forth. And he mentions all these plants. And the next verse says, and the earth brought forth all these plants. So I saw bring forth and brought forth. And I thought, well, probably the same verb being used each time. It certainly looks like that in English. But when you look at the Hebrew, two very different verbs are used there. That happens quite frequently. It reads better when you use two different words rather than the same word again and again. And so I looked up the meanings of those words, and there's a lot of overlap between them, so they can be used synonymously. But it got across the idea of something very dynamic. You could interpret those words or translate them as thrust or shoot, produced, sprout. And when I got my head wrapped around that, I realized, if I were there, if I time machine, go back to day 3, what I think I would do is I would see plants ripping up out of the ground. That's a description, at least you're getting. Sort of like a time-lapse movie. I don't know if you've seen Eric Hoven's movie, Genesis, Paradise Lost, but I was just so excited when I first saw that and got to the day 3, and all these plants are just coming up out of the ground and shooting up and branching outward. It's exactly how I visualized, and it was nice to know that Eric saw that too. And what this was a maturing taking place. God didn't make the trees mature. He made the plants mature. He matured the plants very quickly, is what it seems to suggest from the language used there. And I think many times I'm guilty of this myself in the past, we tend to think of everything in the creation week as being ex nihilo, out of nothing.
Right. You think
some things are, but many things are not. God formed the man out of the dust of the ground. He formed Eve from his side. He formed the land animals and birds from the dust of the ground too. He formed the plants out of the ground. So a lot of times it was not ex nihilo. Furthermore, it's not instantaneous. Many times people think just poof, it happened like that. There was nothing there, and there was a whale, there's a tree. That's not how it happened at all. There's a lot of this very rapid development taking place. And it's not a slow process. It's very miraculous, very quick, and very directed. And the reason why the plants had to be matured very quickly is that they were, man and beast both had to eat those things, use them for food in a matter of days. And that would be a problem because it normally would take weeks to months to years for things to mature enough to produce seed and things that animals and man could eat. So that's getting back to the purpose again, the very good that God pronounced. And I got to thinking, well, if you've got one pattern playing out on one day of creation, could the same pattern play out on another day as well? That is, if God rapidly brought forth those plants out of the ground to fulfill their purposes on day 3, then could God also have rapidly brought the light on day 4 to bring the light to the earth? And I guess you could argue, I'm arguing for the you could conclude that I'm arguing that the speed of light was very rapid early on. The difference being is that Barry Setterfield was trying to give a physical mechanism to explain that problem. I'm not doing that at all. I'm appealing to a miracle taking place. And I look, throughout the creation week again and again and again, I see miracle, 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 miracle. There was nothing normal, quote unquote, about the creation week. It was very abnormal compared to the sustaining that's going on today. And some of my creation science brethren have criticized my idea that my solution is simply that God did it. Well, yeah. Can you give, they want to look for a naturalistic physical explanation for this event or problem that they have in the creation week. My response is, can you give me an example of anything during the creation week that was not supernatural? And I don't think you can. So why do we...
I'm guessing that our atheist friends are not going to be real thrilled with that either.
No, but they're not going to be. They're going to be real thrilled with creation in general. That's really the issue. Right.
But the interesting thing too, though, is when you look at even like the Big Bang model or something. I mean, you've got some stuff. If that's not a miracle, man, it sounds like one, because you have everything coming out of nothing. You have all the fine-tuned parameters exactly right. Against all odds, everything's working out, exactly. And you get, we had Lawrence Krauss with us last year, who wrote the universe, A Universe from Nothing. And he was defending that and talking about nothing includes quantum fluctuations and dark energy and all. But at the very end, he gave what I would consider a concession. He said, "Okay, well, I'll agree with one thing. First we had nothing, then we had everything." So when somebody, I mean, that if that's not a miracle, it certainly sounds like a miracle.
Quantum nothingness is still something. That's the problem.
Exactly. That's what we were asking. That's what we were giving him a hard time about. So he was very defensive about that.
Plus, one other point I want to make here is you mentioned the Big Bang. Many people don't realize the Big Bang has the light travel time problem too. It's called the horizon problem, and that was a known problem almost a half century ago. It was cosmic inflation was put forth in the 80s, almost 40 years ago, about 40 years ago now, to solve this problem. So, if they're permitted to explain their problem away with a solution like that, I think we should be allowed to do the same thing.
Well, I think they have their ad hoc, explanations, even the multiverse theory, to try to explain away the fine-tuning argument. If you have enough universes, trillions of them, or maybe even an infinite number of universes, then one of them mathematically will have all the parameters correct. But again, you're appealing to something that's not scientific, it's not observable.
I think Sean Carroll came out with his book 2020, a year or two ago, Something Deeply Hidden, where he basically concedes, or he accepts Hugh Everett's many worlds quantum interpretation, many worlds, which is not really multiverse, but the implications are that if Everett was right, there are a multitude of our doppelgangers in other quantum other realities that have fluctuated into existence like ours has. So it seems like, I think what James is saying and what we're saying is that if you go to a naturalistic explanation for the origin of the universe, or what is quote unquote before, even though that's a little nonsensical, you get all kinds of theories. I was just
I almost a year ago I published I think a very elegant proof that the multiverse does not exist. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
Yes.
If the multiverse is true, then you've got an infinite number of universes out there where every possibility is played out. For instance, there's at least one universe out there where I'm not here talking to you because I forgot we had a program tonight, or whatever. All sorts of every possibility works out. So if that's the case, then every possibility of everything that possible outcome has been played out somewhere. And that means that there exists at least one universe where the Captain and Tennille's song Muskrat Love was the #1 song of the 70s. We know that is impossible. So therefore, the multiverse does not exist. And I published that on April 1st last year. So,
well, also, if there was an infinite number of universes, then that means every possible event would be actual in at least one of the universes, which means at least one of the universes has an all-powerful God, which would automatically make him the God of all the universes.
I hadn't thought about that. So.
That's the ontological argument, but we don't have to get into that right now.
No, please don't.
So what you're saying, Danny, is as I was reading in your book, if I can make an analogy for everybody, Christian or not, the idea is basically biblical in the sense that you see a similar application being like, nobody's saying, what were the technical means by which Jesus made more bread and fish for people? What were the technical means by which Jesus created wine, instantaneously? Things that take time, the growth of grapes, the maturation of wine into the alcohol and the sugars, the growth of fish bones and the raising of wheat and the baking of bread. These are all time-consuming endeavors. And Jesus made mature bread and fish and wine for everybody. And so you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly in the book, and you're saying that you kind of see the light time travel issue as something similar to the fish and the bread and the wine. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I spent decades trying to figure out quote unquote scientific or physical explanation for the light travel time problem, and I think the key is realizing that everything about the creation week was miraculous, and so it's really that has to be the solution that we have here. And really,
so let me see if I'm just to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. So the age old problem: if you chop down a tree in the Garden of Eden, would you see growth rings? And I think if I'm hearing you correctly, if you chop down a tree, you would see the growth rings, but it doesn't mean it was 100 years old. What it means is it very quickly. You gave the great illustration of time-lapse photography. It went through every stage in its natural maturity. So in a matter of minutes or hours, went through the stages so that you see a fully mature tree, but it didn't poof ex nihilo out of nothing. Yeah. It was actually, it actually went through that process. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, that's what the Hebrew two verbs there used seem to imply. And that seems to be the pattern we see acting throughout the creation week. Again, it's an implication. It's an inference I'm making. It's not something that's clearly taught. There's, we got a bare bones description of the creation week, but what we do have revealed to us is quite remarkable. It's outside of what we call the norm today of how things operate.
Danny, would you say, I could see some people might be objecting to this on the grounds that what you're suggesting says, are you saying that we shouldn't look for a technical problem? Are you, a science stopping, God did it, God of the gaps kind of thing, where you're just saying, well, it's a miracle and we don't have to investigate it? What do you think about that?
Well, during the creation week, I don't think we should be looking for natural explanations for things. But, at the end of the creation week, God, it says pretty clearly there that God ceased creating, and he's not been in the creation business since. God is in the sustaining business. This is echoed in Colossians 1, 16 and 17, and Hebrews 1 through 3, Hebrews 1 through 3, where Jesus as the creator is also the sustainer, upholding the universe, the world by the power of his word. And I do believe the sustaining also being an act of God is miraculous too. If God stopped doing this, sustaining, I am convinced that the world would cease to exist. Exactly what would happen, I haven't a clue. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, we don't recognize it as miracles because we tend to think of miracles as being outside the norm. And since the creation week ended, God has generally been working through this sustaining, and this sustaining is very interesting because God is a God of order and God of decrees, and he's one who is then going to uphold the world in a regular way. And that then gives you the working hypothesis that there would be order, and there would be rules, as it were, patterns that you could follow. And this was actually the working hypothesis 400 years ago when science was largely created in Protestant Europe. These were people steeped in biblical thinking, and they were trying to think God's thoughts after. And that's how science got started as we know it, at least in the first place. And it was a very robust sort of hypothesis that's led to the world of science we have today. And again, that's that repeatability and the pattern. There's a quote out there that's been attributed to Einstein. I'm always skeptical when I see quotes like that attributed to Einstein, but he reportedly said that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible, and that is the sentiment expressed by some scientists today, that there's this marvel at the fact that the universe does seem to be so ordered. But in the Christian worldview, we would expect that because God has imposed that sort of thing onto the world. And that's where I can integrate my science with my biblical worldview. I don't see a conflict at all there. I believe that God normally works through that regular pattern, which I would call physics all the time, or most of the time. Occasionally, he intervenes to alter those rules or to do something different. That's what we call a miracle today. But those are the rare exceptions, not the general rule.
James, we have I don't know how you feel about fielding a geology question, Danny, but we do have someone asking.
Let me make a quick announcement first, because I failed to do that earlier. I know there's quite a bit of chat already going on the back and forth, and there's some questions out there. If you do have a question, if you'll please either text it to the group, what your question is, or text it directly to Daniel Ray. And even if you have a question but you don't want to come on camera, that's okay. Just say, would you ask the question for me? And we would be willing to do that. And we'll try to get them in the queue. So I apologize. I forgot to mention that earlier.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So we have, Danny, if you're comfortable, we have a geology question, and then Ken feels well informed enough to ask his question. So we could go.
The worst I can say is I don't know. So let's hear the question.
So let's take Susan has a question. Susan, if you want to unmute, you can ask the question, or I can ask it for you, whatever you'd like. Go ahead, Susan. You're on.
Hey, I'll read my question.
Okay.
Well, I'm talking about the Earth being made with the appearance of age. You know, there are 76 quadrillion tons of biomass deposits. And especially, I think about limestone, which is made up of the shells of sea animals, and dirt also. You know, soil is made up of decaying stuff. So my question is, God would have had to create the earth with the appearance of age. Do you think that is how God did it? Did those trilobites, brachiopods, et cetera, which make up limestone, never really exist? That's my question.
Yeah, okay. I'm not a geologist, so I can try to answer this in a very general sense. We don't deny that fossils are real. In my backyard, there's a creek. What we have here locally are Ordovician fossils. We generally find horned corals and bivalves, there's a couple other things. One thing you could find locally are trilobites, but I've never found one in my backyard, and I'm still hoping I will at some point. We creationists generally think that most of the fossils were laid down during the time of Noah's flood. Not all of them were, but most of them we think were. Getting down specific which ones were, which one weren't, that gets beyond my expertise. But that's the general answer that I think our geologists who are recent creationists would argue.
But what about soil? God made, Adam out of the soil. Dirt takes a long time to come about.
Yeah, today's soil takes a while to form. My response would be that, again, God created the world fully functioning over 6 days, and those plants needed soil in order to draw nourishment and to grow and have roots. So God initially would have created that soil pretty quickly. What process, I wouldn't have a clue. If it was a rapid process, what he used, he never really addressed that like he did the plants. So, but God would have had to provide that because it's necessary for plants to grow.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. It's a good question.
Ken, you are on deck, sir. Go ahead and fire away. I think you have something about a long. I sent Danny the question. I don't know, Danny, if you got it, but Ken had a question about something, a galaxy or something. Is that correct? Oh, he's got the link. So go ahead, Ken. I think.
Yeah, I just posted a link to a photograph of a galaxy traveling through space towards a galaxy cluster. And my understanding is that the speed of that galaxy as it's moving through space is actually accelerating as it moves towards the center of gravity of that cluster. There's and I'm going to start by saying that I now have two questions, because in light of Dr. Faulkner's solution to the starlight problem, it leads me to one that I think is even more interesting than this one that I'm about to have. So I'll start with this one that everybody is familiar with, that I've already raised on our Facebook channel. Then I'll follow with the second one if I'm given the time to do that. So the first one is this galaxy that's traveling, and it's leaving behind a trail of debris, mostly gases, and then also there's some stars that are trailing it in kind of spindly stars trails. And the length of that trail is measured at 260,000 light years, which is not a duration in time, but an actual distance. And oh yeah, good. Thank you for bringing that up. So the distance from the head to the tail is 260,000 light years. So, and I I put this in the Facebook post, but at the rate it's currently traveling at, it would take, what did I say, like 82 million years for it to traverse that distance. So it's not a question of, did the light have enough time to get to our eyes? It's a totally different question. It's a question of how did that galaxy manage to travel that immense distance in the space of the last 6,000 years. But I know your solution now is, okay, well, that all happened instantaneously or very quickly as a miracle. I guess that's an interesting approach. I've never heard that approach before, but it leaves me a little bit unsatisfied in that it makes you think that, okay, well, this galaxy physically had to be traveling probably hundreds of thousand times the speed of light, and E equals mc squared, and if the speed, and nothing can go faster than the speed of light, right? So the speed of light had to be going many, probably millions of times faster than it is now. And if you take the equation E equals mc squared, you can you square c, the speed of light, millions of times over, and then the mass just kind of explodes. It's really an inconceivable situation that you could actually have this trail of debris that looks like nothing happened other than a normal natural process. It just nothing about it tells me that something extraordinary happened that would cause that to look any. So I can't imagine that it would look like this. In other words, I'm having trouble articulating it. It'd be hard to imagine that it would look like this if it actually happened in a split second or whatever time frame that you're allowing for it to happen in. So that was my first question. Go ahead.
Let me handle this, and we'll come to your second. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay. What you're giving here is an example of what appears to be an ongoing process. Yeah. Not only is this object very far away from us, but it seems to indicate that some things were going on prior to that.
There's no discontinuity. It looks continuous.
Yeah, and there are other examples. When I have a presentation I give on the light travel time problem, and my title slide is a pair of galaxies sitting here that are kind of interacting in a weird way, and not only are the pair of galaxies 300 million light years away from us, which just seemed to be a problem to start with, but it again, the picture suggests an ongoing process prior to the light actually leaving. I could give other examples. You came with a good one. It doesn't matter. One's example isn't good enough. I will admit that there are others. And one first thing I would point out is that we're interpreting these images to be interactions going on. We could be misinterpreting those, though I don't really want to go there. I don't think that's a good argument to make, but it is a possibility we ought to at least consider. So I don't have a full explanation for this. What was going on during the creation time? Was God speeding up a process? I don't know. I don't have a totally satisfactory answer for that sort of question. There are a couple other things about my proposal that I still haven't worked out and I still puzzle over. I don't think there's anything to be gained by sweeping it under the rug and trying to claim that this is not a problem, because it is a problem. So I'll grant that to you with saying I don't have an answer right now.
Okay, well, I do appreciate your forthrightness about that. That's not something that in my experience, every creationist is willing to go.
And I agree that that's a problem, and they ought not to do that.
Yeah. So then my second example was, and I just posted a link to it. It's an article, but there's an image within that article. I don't know if it's possible to bring up that link again
You got it, James?
Yes.
Okay.
In the middle of that article, there's a diagram with it's a chart with a green
ice cores.
Yeah, the green and the red lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so
I'm getting that now.
Oh, this is not ice cores. The plot is oxygen isotope variation in fossilized plankton in the seafloor.
It's both. This is superimposed.
Yep, I see that now. Yeah, the ice core is below and the other is above. One's red, one's green. I got you.
You got that?
Yeah, so I'm not a scientist. I'm just a layperson, an interested layperson, so I don't have any special expertise in this. But what the article is maintaining is that We know that the precision of the sun's orbit and how it comes closer and to the Earth and farther away, or vice versa, the Earth comes closer and farther away. Of the orbit changes, and there's this 100,000 year cycle that occurs that's you can mathematically derive. And so what he's arguing is that on the bottom you have the Antarctic ice cores, these that have been pulled up from the Antarctic layers. And so I know in some creationist circles, there's questions of whether those are truly annual layers. And there's various arguments that can come to bear to say that these really are annual layers. One of which is that there's historical volcanic events that you can track down and say, okay, well, in the year 76 or whatever AD, there was Pompeo, or we can see the layer of ash at that point, and so we see annual layers going down at that point. And so if we extrapolate down further, we already know that those are annual, so we just keep going, and lo and behold, we come up with 100,000 year variations. Every 100,000 years, you have these spikes, oxygen isotope spikes within that correlate with temperature increases or decreases over time. And we have a similar a phenomenon for the seafloor plankton isotope levels. The oxygen isotope levels bear the same cadence every 100,000 years.
Looking at the plots, they do appear to be correlated.
Right. So from a kind of an older standpoint, the explanation is that these are truly annual layers. So there's ice layers going back for at least 400,000 years. And they have telltale signs of various things going on. That, in other words, they tell a history. It would be hard to imagine that God just kind of made it all come together in a few minutes. I don't know if you're claiming this happened in minutes or days or years or what, but it would just be hard to imagine that this would tell a story. I can understand the idea of plants coming out, just very quickly coming out of the earth to make fully mature plants. But the idea that there would be these layers, what's the purpose of these layers that appear to be annual layers going back over 400,000 years?
Well, I appreciate your confidence in asking me the question, but I really don't. I don't have a clue what to say about this. It's not something I've looked at, and that would take me a bit of time to sort through. And even then, I don't know how worthwhile my opinion on this may be. So. Again, it looks to be a problem, but I'm not aware what the solution might be or the proper answer might be.
Okay, that's fair, and I appreciate that. But I think Daniel said that if anybody else wants to weigh in.
Great questions, Ken, man. And hey, Danny, I really appreciate your honesty and just saying, I don't know, because that's what I tell Christians and atheists. Hey, you don't know everything. I mean, you're the man. I mean, and so forth. By the way, I met you probably 15 years ago, I think. Were you at the Liberty Baptist Creation Conference?
At the, was that Liberty University?
Yeah.
And it was in the Coliseum there with with Ken Ham and everything. Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, I was there, and I was getting everybody to sign the thing, and I was sending it off to Hugh Ross. So, and you and that's why speaking of Hugh Ross, you and him had a debate on the John Ankerberg show.
Yeah.
And one thing I really like about you is you all gave your different views on the starlight problem, and then you came back. And, a lot of people would have just said, hey, I'm out of here. But you came back and showed up, and, there was 4 evangelicals, and they said, hey, it looks like we're going to have to go with Hugh Ross. The universe is 13.7 billion years. And if anybody knows Hugh Ross, he started Reasons to Believe. What did you think when all 4 evangelicals, who were astronomers and were very sharp people, sided with you?
Well, I think all of them already sided with Hugh to start with. So they were not neutral observers to start with. So the burden of proof was entirely upon me. If Hugh said nothing, that wouldn't have changed anything because he didn't have to convince them. They already agreed with them. So I had a huge burden of responsibility, and I failed to meet that for whatever reasons.
To make matters worse, Danny, Bill was a Christian when he met you, and you did not prevent him from going to the dark side. So, I told them you would be late, Bill. But for those who don't know, anybody new, Bill Cluck is our co-founder of our Atheist and Christian Book Club. I'm the Christian co-founder. He is the former Christian, now atheist co-founder. And glad you were able to get in here. Sorry you couldn't make it right at the beginning. But
absolutely, yeah. Another question. People like William Lane Craig, many Christian evangelicals look at the Big Bang, and like when Hugh Ross says, it looks like there was a transcendent being outside of time, space, and matter. And when Hugh Ross, you'll appreciate this, when he speaks, it looks like it's coming down from Mount Sinai. He has just such a, am I right, Danny?
Sort of, yeah, I get that.
I mean, and he's like absolutely wrong on things like Daniel. He believes Daniel was written in 600 BC. He has no clue what he's talking about on so many things. And by the way, I can agree with you on, well, let me get first to the Big Bang. So they use this apologetic to say, wow, look, if you wind this universe back, it gets hotter and hotter and so forth. And it just seems there's a singularity, and that this thing had to have a cause outside of time, space, and matter. Why don't you like the Big Bang, or do you think that is a good reason to apologetic for Christian evangelicals?
Well, I think my primary objection to the Big Bang is it doesn't seem to fit with Scripture at all. It's actually quite contrary to what Scripture says. The argument that not only Craig and Ross make is that I think Robert Jastrow, who, as far as I know, was an agnostic, made a similar sort of argument. But the argument is that for centuries in the West, the belief was the universe was eternal, and that idea persisted until about a half century ago, and the Big Bang changed all of that. Suddenly, people are now saying the universe had a beginning, and so the argument is that, well, if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner, and that argument on its face at least looks convincing that there must be a creator, but then the devil gets in the details. How do you get to that point? And one of the problems I have with Craig particularly is the way he gets there. He argues causality, that the universe had to have, since it suddenly came into existence, it had to have an uncaused cause, as it were, to make that happen. And it seems to me the causality argument only works in time. I can't think of a single example of an effect that was before the cause. I think the cause has to always precede the effect in time. You have to have the cause first and then the effect. And the real problem here, and I think Hugh Ross makes the same mistake, is that if you really understand the Big Bang model, it's not just the beginning of space and matter and energy, it's also a beginning of time itself. The Big Bang is time t equal to 0. There is no time before the Big Bang. I used to tell my students that if you ask what was here before the Big Bang, it's wrong on two accounts, because here, which denotes space, wasn't here then, and then, which denotes time, wasn't then either. You can't have space and time before the Big Bang. In fact, that question or that statement makes no sense. And so that's what the model says today. And I think the common misconception people have is that time and space always existed, and then the Big Bang happened at one point in some location in space, and that's not it at all. But if you take the common misconception, it leaves time prior to the Big Bang where God could have acted. And when I bring this point up to people, they try to argue some sort of trans-universe or metaphysical cause and effect relationship, but that's entirely not being presented at all. You're making that ad hoc to make that work. Maybe I'm kind of rambling and not making sense, but the point is, causality argument only works if you have time to work with, but the Big Bang doesn't allow for that to happen. As bad as William Lane Craig and Hugh Ross don't want to admit it, the way the Big Bang theory is structured today, it is an uncaused cause. And you don't need but one uncaused cause. it's illogical to argue that you have one uncaused cause that causes another uncaused cause. That violates the whole definition of an uncaused cause.
Well, that's interesting too, Danny, because I know physics is a buzz, cosmological astrophysics and cosmogony in the secular realm are talking about this very principle of uncaused causes with the quantum things. So it kind of resonates, I think, if I'm understanding you properly, that our universe is an uncaused cause in terms of how we classically understand causation. Is that right?
Yes, if you understand the Big Bang model, because there can be no antecedent to it, because time begins then there cannot be another uncaused cause there. The universe, the Big Bang is the uncaused cause.
In a debate with between Bill Craig and Sean Carroll, the atheist cosmologist in New Orleans, maybe 6 or 7, 8 years ago, that came up in the debate, and what Dr. Craig said, if I remember correctly, was that the causality works that it has to be prior to, which would be a problem with t being 0. He said, or simultaneous with. So I don't know if that makes it more obscure or helps.
Well, I think what Craig is doing is that he's talking about the science of the Big Bang, and then when you're not looking, he substitutes his own version of the Big Bang model. That's the problem. And it's a real clever sleight of hand. I think it's so clever, he's not even noticed it. But he's at some point substituting something other. He argues the scientific quote unquote model, the one the model cosmologists talk about of the Big Bang, but then at some point he substitutes his own version in there. And I think that's the hidden problem.
You seem to have a very high view of scripture. In Genesis, you say these are superior. The meta-narrative that you use, the Genesis account, says that is superior to the Babylonian, Enuma Elish and so forth, because of the reasons you articulate, which makes sense. I obviously have a very low view of the meta-narrative, and here's why. You have the earth created on the first day and the sun created on the fourth day, and you have the plants become on the third day. The plants are coming way too early in this narrative. And I agree with you that this does seem to indicate these pre-scientific Jewish writers, the P writer in the 1000 BC, the 10th century, and the J writer, who's a little bit more anthropomorphic and has a different perspective on the nature of God, is writing in the 6th century. These guys don't have a clue about science, so they make these horrendous mistakes. And of course, if you go to the Creation Museum, they have dinosaurs and men on the 6th day, riding along each other. I mean, this is Flintstone stuff. So they just couldn't get it any more wrong. Atoms weren't created to 380,000 years after the Big Bang. Stars weren't created to 100 million years after the Big Bang. So they have the heavens and earth created the same day. Totally wrong. And it just goes on and on. The special creation, man, is, and some of these creepy things. What's creepy thing or creeping things? We have modern taxonomy where we have chordates, we have arthropods, we have certain criteria which we go by to classify things. So do you agree with me that, and see what Hugh Ross does, which I respect you. You're saying, look, they meant 6 days, they meant 6,000 years. Stop trying to cram millions of years into it like Hugh Ross. And what happens is Hugh Ross will say, well, it was translucent. The sun really agrees with modern cosmology that it was created before the earth, but it was translucent. They just appeared on the 4th day. Well, please, if they wanted to use that word, they could have found a word for appear. He's just trying to make scripture fit with modern day cosmology. And here's the problem: the cure is worse than the disease. So can't you guys just say this is just pre-scientific people had no clue what they're talking about, and just leave it at that?
Well, a couple of points. Number one, you've pointed out the wrong hermeneutic approach that people have. Hugh is one example of a Christian attempting to make the Bible fit the science. And we start out at the beginning of our conversation, which you probably missed, That's the reverse. You're supposed to interpret everything in terms of Scripture, in terms of what God says. Number two, you were saying that atoms didn't exist until 380,000 years after the Big Bang.
Yeah.
But that's assuming the Big Bang theory is correct. And what you've just done is give a very good argument as to why I reject the Big Bang model, because it's incompatible with what Genesis says. You get that. A lot of people don't get that, apparently. Hugh Ross doesn't get it, for instance, right. But you get it, that the two are incompatible. You prefer to believe the Big Bang and then try to interpret Scripture as you will. And I take the opposite approach, a very different approach. But the very first thing you let off with was the problem with the plants being made on day 3 and the sun coming along later. But the light was there on day 1. The light preceded the plants by 2 days. And there are many marijuana plants that never see the light of day. I had a colleague at the university who 20 years ago, she and her husband were on federal charges because they were growing a lot of marijuana in their basement. They had the windows completely taped over and they had plant lights growing them down there. All that's required for plants is a right kind of light. It doesn't have to be sunlight, right kind of light. And so the answer is right there in the text in verse 3. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The sun then apparently took over that primary part of that function on day 4, but the light was already there.
Well, and see, Hugh Ross's own people, I used to, look at reasons to believe stuff, and his own people said the plants come too early. They're way later than the Cambrian and so forth. And it just, to me, it's like, why take this serious?
Particularly mentioned the flowering plants that seem to be the focus of the plants in day 3. That's another problem with trying to make things scripture. He also believes in the day age theory, and you're absolutely correct. Angiosperms did not come about in the conventional thinking of things until about 60, 70, about 100 million years ago, really. But they didn't become dominant until after 60, 65 million years ago.
Thank you.
That's what it's a timeline. And that, again, is a good argument why if you're a believer, why you should not take the approach of starting with the quote unquote science then trying to make the Bible fit to it. So you and I are agreeing on quite a bit tonight.
Hey, this is great.
But these are agreement on the details. The big issues we disagree on.
Well, and see, again, Hugh Ross, there's something about him that just sounds like Jesus is saying it or something. He just blows everybody away with his, vast knowledge of astronomy and stuff. But, I think evening day, it's just clearly they're thinking of 6 days. Stop trying to cram a million years in it. Anyway, thanks a lot, Danny, for answering.
All right. Thanks for asking.
Phil Baird, you wanted to jump in. I know you said you were eager to share something. If you want to unmute and share something, you can go ahead.
What I was doing was I was heckling from the chat.
Oh, you were heckling from the chat. Well, if you want to heckle live, go ahead. We'll let you do that. You're a charter member, so just keep it cool, man.
Thank you. That you just declared that today. That's so we should celebrate.
Yeah.
Well, a couple things. First of all, I kind of wanted to just briefly make a comment about William Lane Craig. He uses Leibniz in his argument about causation, and I think that Stephen Meyer and I settled that issue once and for all time and all humanity and for all of history when we had our discussion with Stephen Meyer, and that was that causality does not necessarily require temporality. That something can be causal, you can have a causal relationship without there being a temporal relationship. And so the idea that causality needs time to be a factor so that one thing can follow another, that applies to natural causes. But there are more kinds of causes than natural causes. So there can be, I don't want to get into the details, of the different kinds of causality, but I think Steve and I did did the world a favor by settling that issue last time we had it.
Hey, Phil, could you do you have off the top of your head like an example of a cause and effect relationship that's not linked to time?
Well, basically, actually, this leads into the second part of my comments here.
Okay.
And that is that if God created the universe and created the earth, and created life, if he's the creator, and if the scripture is giving us a reliable yet very high level summary of the creation, then we have to recognize and we have to live with the fact that what was happening was supernatural. That this was a supernatural event, the creation of the universe, the creation of life, the creation of the earth. This was a supernatural event. And so if that's the case, then we're going to have to throw all of our naturalistic assumptions out the window. We cannot use naturalism or natural causes as a basis for trying to evaluate what was going on during the creation week and the universe itself was created.
But Phil, that's exactly what they're doing right where we live in Dallas. There's the Institute for Creation Research, Answers in Genesis, I think who you're with, Danny, right?
Yes.
That has built the Creation Museum. They're trying to reconcile science with scripture. Am I right, Danny?
I understand that, and I acknowledge that. My point is that there's going to be a limit to how much you can try to reconcile science with scripture.
So what do you think?
Because of the fact that this is a supernatural event by the very nature of the case. So if that's the case, then and I don't object to people trying to reconcile science with scripture. I think that's a valuable, a valid endeavor, but only up to a certain point. And so what we have is we have a supernatural event that we're trying to understand in naturalistic terms. And we're trying to explain various natural causes and natural phenomena on the basis of natural law. But if all these things are created by a supernatural, all-powerful God, then all the rules that we're bringing to the table are suddenly no longer even valid.
So what's your question to Danny?
I don't have a question to Danny.
Okay. All right. How about a comment from Dr.
Can I make a comment or?
Well, I mean.
Oh, Ken has a comment before. Go ahead, Ken.
But if I had a question for Danny, it would be this. Do you believe that it's even necessary or even possible to try to answer some of these, quote, problems in a way that relies on human knowledge and human understanding? Daniel put a comment in the chat not too long ago. It said, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" You know, so these things we're trying to pretend as though human intellect is capable of comprehending things that we just simply cannot comprehend.
So what do you think?
Because of the fact that it was a supernatural event. I wrote a book called Machines Don't Laugh. It's about the fallacies of atheism. And one of the comments that I made in there is that if the origin of the universe is supernatural, then we have no way of knowing when the supernatural causes ended and the natural causes began. And if that's the case, then to even ask about how old the universe is suddenly becomes a meaningless question. It's almost meaningless to try to even think about the age of the universe.
So can Dr. Faulkner
because age implies time, and time implies natural causes.
We got the gist. Go ahead, Dr. Faulkner.
Well, I think maybe we agree more than you might realize. I mean, early on I was speaking about the light travel time problem, and I said I disagree with some of my creation science brethren because they're looking for naturalistic explanations for it. No, it's got to be supernatural. Everything during the creation week was supernatural, but at the end of the creation week, God switches from creating to sustaining, And that's when the quote unquote naturalism takes over. Naturalism, I guess, nature is just a term we use to describe the way that God has ordained the world works today. And so we can use that approach to study the world today, but it can't tell us things in the distant past. It can't tell us about how the world came to be. I'm convinced that the origin of the universe is a metaphysical answer. I think looking at the first and second laws of thermodynamics combined together leads me to that conclusion, apart from scripture, as it turns out. I could be happy to share that with you if you'd like. But ultimately, when you extrapolate things in the past, you can't use quote unquote the science at that point. And one thing I wanted to pick up on, you said there about the assumption of about the age of the universe, the age of the world. I think you're onto something really good there, because a lot of my creation science brethren will say, well, God created the world with an appearance of age. But then later on, they want to say, well, there's all this evidence out there that the universe is young. Think about that for just a moment. If God created the universe with an appearance of age, then why are you looking for evidence that it's not really that old after all? It's inconsistent to make that case. Now, I think you can fix that problem, but you got to be more careful. I think a lot of my creation science brethren just a little sloppy on that point over the years.
Oh, by the way, when I was younger, when I was a Christian, they gave me Russell Humphrey's book, Starlight and Time. Right. So his thing is, you have time dilated, which is true. When you're on Mount Everest, it's not the same time. It slows down. And in the distant parts of the universe, it even just slows down even more. Am I right, Dr. Faulkner?
Yes.
So at the end of the book, he goes, hey, I don't know if this is going to work or not, this white hole cosmology, which is kind of nuts. He goes, maybe someone else can figure this thing out. And I'm going, if you guys can't figure it out. And then when I would go to the conferences, they would say, oh, no, he's all wrong. Here's my view of young Earth cosmology. So they couldn't even agree among themselves. Do you understand, Phil? So how am I supposed to trust it?
Well, one of the things, whenever I've had discussions like this, one of the objections is usually that okay, all we're doing is we're just abandoning science. Then when we talk about supernatural causality as opposed to temporal or natural causality, the objection constantly is, so you're in other words, you don't think science is real. You don't think science is even valid. And that's not really what we're saying. What we're saying is that natural law, the uniformity of natural causes is a perfectly valid principle. It's just that it's not a closed system. And that when you're talking about origins, you can't necessarily think in the same categories. And so we're not abandoning science. What we're doing is we're saying that there are limitations to science. And if you're talking about a supernatural event, you cannot use scientific categories to try to evaluate.
What you're saying makes perfect sense, which Dr. Faulkner's agreed. Here's the problem. You're making if I go up the street to ICR and I take their little tour, they're going to say a 6,000-year universe. Well, if that's the case, let's just stop wasting $10 billion on the Webb telescope. And I mean, what do you think of that, Dr. Faulkner?
I like the James Webb telescope. It's optimized to look at very distant high redshift galaxies. It doesn't necessarily mean that those galaxies are from the earliest epochs of the universe. Could be, but all it means is that they're high redshift. Whatever that means depends on your cosmology or cosmogony, actually. But yeah, I'm bullish about the new telescope.
Hey, be a prophet for us for just a minute. What are we going to find with the James Webb?
I haven't a clue. Every time we build a new world-class telescope, we discover all sorts of things we never dreamed of before. In the 1960s, when I was growing up, there were three huge things that took place. They discovered quasars, and they discovered pulsars. They discovered the CMB. Those were all three big discoveries in just like 8 years or so. Nobody saw those things coming for the most part. And every time you build a bigger telescope, you find things you never anticipated. So I'm not even going to try to answer that question. We're going to be surprised. I will predict we'll be surprised quite a bit. That's a safe prediction.
Let me take just a moment, if I can, to share with you, see if I can get the screen up here, do a little bit of housekeeping to talk about what we have coming up, and also give a report. Now that Bill's here, I'll give a little bit of report on, see if I can pull that up for just a second, on our trip to Albuquerque we just got back from, and what a road trip. But anyway, let's see here. We do have last month's book club available to watch on video if you missed. It's available at atheistchristianbookclub.com. Alan Lightman talked about his book Probable Impossibilities, coming from an agnostic perspective. And so want to encourage you, if you have not, if you missed last month, it's now online to watch at atheistchristianbookclub.com. And we have next month lined up. We are going to have Dr. Robert Price. He's going to be talking about his a book he's co-authored along with John Loftus. It's Varieties of Mythicism. So John Loftus is the editor of the anthology, wrote several of the chapters, but Bob Price wrote 3 of the chapters. And so those are going to be our reading, and we'll get that up on the book on the website and also on Facebook pretty soon. Want to give you time to take a look at that. He'll be joining us in person by Zoom. And what I like about it, a couple of things we talked about briefly before, and I've talked to him about privately on, is as a member of the Jesus Seminar, it was his job with these other very liberal New Testament scholars to get together and vote on which sayings in the Gospels Jesus actually said, what he may have said, what he probably said, and what he almost certainly did not say. And they would vote with colored beads. So a black bead, Jesus didn't say it. Red bead, he did say it. And gray bead. And but the interesting thing is, what I want to ask him about next month is, as a mythicist, he believed Jesus did not exist at all. So do you really need any beads besides a black bead? Because, I mean, obviously, you don't even have to think about it. Did Jesus say you can throw your bead in before the question's out? He didn't say anything if he never existed. So I want to ask him about that. The other thing, though, that's I think interesting about him is, and I think all of us may have learned this a little bit, that there's a tendency, not just for Christians, I think atheists too, we tend to prejudge and think, all Christians believe this, and certainly all atheists believe that. But Bob Price definitely breaks that mold. And so he told me why he's no longer a member of the Jesus Seminar, and it wasn't over historical issues, and it wasn't over theological issues, it was over political issues. And Dr. Price is a big Donald Trump supporter, and the others were merciless on how they attacked him for that. So he withdrew and said, I can't work with these people anymore. So he wants to make mythicism great again. So I want to ask him about that, but what I like about it, what I like about that is it shows that all Christians don't fit the mold exactly the same. There's all kinds of Christians. We talked today about young universe Christians, old universe Christians, but atheists the same. Not all atheists are drive Priuses and are liberal and vote for certain presidential candidates.
James, obviously he's not a true atheist if he's a Trump supporter. That just goes totally.
Well, anyway, he breaks the mold, and that's one of the things I like about him. And mythicism, or Jesus mythicism, is the idea that Jesus never existed at all, that most variations of it, the story of Jesus was cobbled together from several earlier myths, even from astrology and Isis and Quetzalcoatl and other pre-Christian.
And here's the thing. David Fitzgerald, Richard Carrier, all the other triune deities in this thing. And, you want to hit a home run. Obviously, if you hit Jesus out of the park with he never existed, been game over, right? But why not try to ground out single and make, talk about the contradictions or his heat or whatever. By the way, Dr. Faulkner, what do you
Well,
think
let me do this before you get to another question, Bill. I do want to take just a moment. I said I would at the beginning, and but I wanted to wait for you to get here. I wanted to tell them about our little road trip to Albuquerque, and Bill and I had the unique opportunity to address the Baptist Convention for the state of New Mexico. And so we met there in Albuquerque, and we had a discussion. We titled it "A Christian and Atheist Discuss God." And so what I wanted to do is maybe have Bill, first of all, thank Bill for willing to do that. He went right into the lion's den with all those Christians, and actually I think enjoyed it a little bit. Well, I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Well, no, here's the thing. They couldn't have been any nicer. They were so wonderful to me. It was just a great experience. And James had to do a name tag that said atheist. Okay. So, which was a great conversation starter. And I felt like Paul at Mars Hill. I mean, it's like the only Christian and with all these huge idols and stuff. So, but they didn't understand that I relish this stuff. I love controversy and apologetics and so forth. So anyway, it's a great experience. We hope to do it again.
I got one story I got to tell. We went to lunch, Bill and I and a couple of friends from Aztec, First Baptist Church, Aztec, New Mexico, Mike Napier and a couple of the staff with him. And so we're out to lunch, but we were with the band for this whole big conference, this big band, the Master's Voice. And so Ricky, the kind of the leader of the band, sitting right next to us. And of all the nerve, Ricky decides to start trying to witness to Bill, and this is right before we're going to have our meeting. One. So yeah, he wasn't the only one. So he starts asking him, Bill, what would it take for you to come back to Christ, and start sharing things with him. And I'm tapping him under the table and going, no, do not lead him to the Lord now. Wait till after we have our conversation. Because it has to be a Christian atheist. Tomorrow will be fine, but do not convert him to the Lord today. Bill, any other thing you want to share from memories of that, or?
Oh yeah, they were trying to make me a Christian. It's like, do you understand? I've been through old Earth, young Earth. And by the way, Dr. Faulkner, when I came here, I studied for years this young Earth, which is fantastic. And whatever view you have, you can learn a lot about radiometric dating, the age of the Earth, phylogeny, because there's just tons to learn. So it's like, do you realize that you cannot close me like I'm some guy that his wife just left him, or he's strung out on drugs? Yeah, and you'll be my friend. Yeah, I'm in. Okay. This girl that I talked to was not a missionary, but a Peace Corps to Uganda. She had been in a variety of cultures. She has lots of questions. So when you try to slam people with a quick gospel thing, then some of these young people are very sophisticated, very knowledgeable, and you're not going to get a quick hit.
Well, let me just say, I've got to give a little bit of context to that, Bill, because you didn't do it justice. I will tell you this one story because it's Bill. What can I say? So we're with these pastors and staff members, and so we're there. Bill is with us on Monday night in this big evangelism conference, and it's all about why we as Christians need to get out of the salt shaker and into the world, and we need to share the gospel with people and stuff like that. So the next day, day 2 of the conference, we go back to pick up Bill at the hotel for lunch. And so we go back to pick him up. Well, he started this spiritual conversation with these 2 women at the front desk of the hotel. I think one of them, Bill, was an anthropologist or cultural anthropologist. And so he's telling her about the fine-tuning argument and wanting to know if she finds that compelling. And she said, what's that? And so he gives like the Christian position of fine-tuning. And she said, well, actually, that does make a lot of sense. So he's talking about that. So he gets in the car and tells us this. I said, Bill, this whole evangelism conference and all those hundreds of people that were there last night, you may be the only one actually put it into practice next day, and you're the atheist. So anyways, but that's Bill for you.
Yeah. So anyway, did you have a question, Ken? We kind of cut you off. Or comment?
I was going to comment following up with what Phil was saying, and I understand and appreciate kind of where you're coming from on that from a general sense. It's just the particular details raise some issues, I think. And I want to drill down on the ice core thing, if I can, for just one quick minute.
You need that image. You need that image back up.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
So you've got all these 400,000 what appear to be annual layers, and there's events recorded within those. There's volcanic eruptions. There's isotopes.
Yeah, they have markers.
So
Yeah, like that Mount Vesuvius.
So there's the suggestion of things going on. So I know that that Answers in Genesis has a little bit different position from, for example, ICR on the question of appearance of age, because, and I think Danny expressed it well, that he's a little bit uncomfortable with the suggestion that God could have just been planting things that didn't really exist. So I'm wondering, in the specific issue of the of those 400,000 layers of in the ice cores, what, in your view, Phil, what was going on in those layers? Was there something? Was there time passing and things happening represented by those layers? Or, I mean, it's one thing to just say, okay, blanket, well, we can't rely on naturalism to answer these questions, that there's miracles. But I just want to press you on what was really going on in those layers. Was God just putting that there for some reason that is a mystery to us, that makes it look like things were going on for 400,000 years? Or what's your view on what was happening then?
Me or Dr. Faulkner?
Phil.
Oh, Phil. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, to be honest, I'd be more interested in what Dr. Faulkner has to say.
Oh, okay, Dr. Faulkner.
But just real quickly, there are some creationist geologists who are catastrophists, and they reject the idea that a lot of these layers took long periods of time to be laid down. But that's a very general answer. I would really be more interested in hearing what Dr. Faulkner.
Go ahead, Dr. Faulkner.
Well, I kind of begged off on addressing that issue. Jake Hebert at ICR has looked into part of this. I believe Tim Clary at ICR has done so as well. Those are the two names that come to mind who would have looked at this. Whatever we're seeing here, if the data are correct, and I have no reason to doubt it, it was some sort of process that was taking place. Now, when it was, what kind of process, I don't know. To me, that's there are many aspects of the creation model we have not worked out yet. That's
yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's an important point, that it's not enough just to say, well, supernatural things were happening, because there's things that are there that call out for an explanation of, well, what was actually going on. So that's where the discussion has to happen.
By the way, Ken, it's not only ice cores. Barbs have these alternating levels.
Oh yeah,
there's
many examples of this sort.
By the way, I know lots of people want to ask questions, so
I think those processes, like the ice cores and the plankton and the strata, I think we would, for the most part, would say those are post-creation events. So we can't say that it was just simply was a metaphysical thing or a supernatural thing, because we again believe that since the creation week, things have been operating differently from what they were before during the creation week. So if it's post-creation week, then we need to explain it probably in a naturalistic way.
Other questions from the other?
What about the heat problem with all the things that supposedly happened during the flood that caused the uplift of the mountains and the layers and the deposits? With all that going on, you probably heard it said, it would have boiled off all the waters of the earth. The earth would have been turned into a fireball.
So I think what you're talking about is the plate tectonics. If you have this rapid plate tectonics, which usually go a fingernail every year,
I'm talking about the water moving and the everything.
Well, no, what you're talking about, you have this they did a rate project, which they went and looked at the rates.
I'm not talking about.
Yeah, well, what they
yeah, Bill.
found was,
Yeah, Bill.
like,
Let
you
her go
have-
ahead. Bill, let her go ahead and just
Okay.
give the question the way she
Well,
wants
anyway,
to.
what they found was you had a lot of daughter element, so you have this really big radioactive decay, if that's true. Go ahead.
I'm
Go
talking
ahead,
about
Susan.
that happened during the flood.
Right.
That the amount of energy involved in what Danny Faulkner thinks happened, that's responsible for a lot of the geomorphology of the Earth. It happened, the laying down of deposits.
Right.
That means a lot of
Let's just
stuff,
go
a lot of
So-
pressure.
So, Dr. Faulkner, you have accelerated radiometric decay, is what the young Earth people say. What do you think?
Not all would say that, but I think the heat. She's talking about something very different, though. She's not talking about what you're talking about.
Okay,
She's
go ahead.
talking about the heat generated by the motion of plates, mantle material, heating of water. I mean, we talk about a lot of tectonic activity taking place at the time of the flood, and the question is how much heat was generated, how was that heat dissipated. Our models generally do allow for increased heat. Like, for instance, most of the models have a significantly warmer water temperature of the oceans after the flood. But not being a geologist or a climatologist, I really haven't studied those in details. I'm not really prepared to
But that's
qualify.
basic physics. That's just basic physics, though.
But I've not reviewed the numbers, so I'd have to look at that.
Well, what the Ray project showed is if you have all this daughter element, then that implies an old Earth. So they've got to go and say, well, that can't be because the Earth's only 6,000 years old in Noah's flood. So what they do is I know, it must be accelerated radiometric decay. The problem when you accelerate that.
So that's true.
Yeah.
That's right. So you
That's
have
the big
the
problem, Susan.
radiometric decay, but I'm just talking about the physical
I know you
problems
are.
of
But that,
energy.
believe me, Susan, that's not the big problem. The big problem is this accelerated radiometric decay, because they spent thousands of dollars, the rate project, on this. And when they found, like, uranium turns into lead, so they have all this daughter, you have the parent and the daughter, they have all this daughter element, and the only way they could explain it is during Noah's flood, you had accelerated decay. The only problem is, like you said, it boils off the ocean's of the Earth's oceans and melts the Earth's crust. And they don't have a solution to the heat problem. It's a huge problem for young Earth people. Jody, did you have a question?
Yeah, you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to know what I think he comes from a young Earth perspective, but I was but I was wondering about, like, in the first verse of Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Could they not have been something there, possibly the way we're reading the scriptures, something there before, like, let's say the age of the earth is maybe millions, billions a year, but then day 1, day 2, day 3, day 7 could be young earth. I mean, what's the odds of that? I was just curious because it seems like the light takes, maybe hundreds of millions of years to get to Earth. That would explain that scientifically, but it seems like the Bible is young Earth on, days 1 through 7, but maybe not. Maybe there was something here to start out.
Sounds like you're articulating the gap theory, doesn't it, Dr. Faulkner?
Yeah,
it
kind of.
Sounds like the gap theory to me, which is an argument put forth 2 centuries ago by a Scottish clergyman named Chalmers to try to accommodate what was then thought millions of years into creation. And he argued that verse 2 should be understood in what's called the pluperfect tense. Instead of the earth was without form and void, as King James says, the earth became without form and void. Grammatically, it doesn't work. There was a fella a number of years ago who wrote a dissertation at Grace Seminary. What was his name? And it was he then published a popular version of his thesis called Unfilled and Unformed, which is a better translation of a Hebrew tohu and bohu there used in verse 2 of Genesis 1. It's problematic. It really isn't supported by the Hebrew at all. And it's the idea is still out there, but it's not nearly as popular as it once was.
Okay, thank you.
Who had another question? Oh, Ron did. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an elephant or maybe a mastodon in the room that we haven't addressed, and that is a question of time. I mean, we think of time as our Earth rotating once in its orbit around the sun, but yet when we go to measure time with clocks, we even can measure a difference just from Fort Collins to Greenwich. And then we talk about the variability of time. To apply our current definition of time to Genesis 1, to me, seems a little bit naive. Could you address that, please?
You're talking about general relativity. The fact is, well, in that case, special relativity or general relativity, both of those. But the upshot is that time is not an absolute, as it turns out.
Right.
What is an absolute is the speed of light in inertial reference frames. And that's kind of opposed to Newtonian physics, but that's the world in which we live. But I don't think that simply saying that time is variable or time is relative, as it were, that just ipso facto solves any kind of time problem which you might see in the creation account. I think you need to specifically deal with that. I've heard many people say, well, general relativity would somehow solve the problem, but without ever telling us actually how to solve the problem. Gerald Schroeder was one who took that approach in a book 20 years ago, at least. And it was very frustrating because he never got around to telling you how to solve the problem. It was just a very general, broad hand-waving sort of thing. And that's not sufficient. If you're going to invoke that, you really need to flesh that in a bit more.
Yeah, Daniel Ray's back yet now. He had some technology issue, internet issues or something. So you can ask him if you want to come on and ask a question. Do we have any?
Christopher, did you?
Already?
Yeah,
Christopher, did you?
Yeah, I have a question. It's a lot like what Phil said. In fact, when he almost took the words out of my mouth, but it goes a little bit. So I'll take it a little bit farther. It's looking at not the earth sciences so much. I mean, there's problems there, but looking at it at cosmology and epistemology. Dr. Faulkner would like to get your take on this. I tend to be more young Earth and young universe the more I think about this. But in terms of just how, asking the question, how do we know what we know cosmologically? I come back to fundamentals like we are on, a small ball in a very big universe. How big people can argue over, but it's big compared to what our little ball is that we live on. And we look at movies like, we've got the Star Trek series and we've got Star Wars. And so people kind of have this idea that like, yeah, we know what the rest of the universe is like. We've been there, or somebody has been there in a, distant galaxy long, long ago. But the reality is we've had 18 guys go to the moon. And that was really hard to do. Maybe we'll get to Mars someday, but if we don't have better propulsion, we're not getting any farther than that. We've had, I think a couple of satellites go, outside to the limits of the solar system. But otherwise, I mean, when you look at things like that are a long way away and happened a long time ago, how long we can again argue about, but we weren't around then. No human beings were there. It seems like we have to have some epistemological humility when we look at this. I mean, I a few years ago, I just started, and I would have been a cosmologist if I'd been better at math, but I wasn't, so went into political science instead. But I started Googling and searching the question, how do we know, how do we get the information for what's out there in, space? And it seemed like basically all of our knowledge comes from radiation of some sort. It's either visible light or somewhere on the light spectrum. And that doesn't tell us a whole lot. So that's where, I think I really resonated to what Phil was saying, is that we're not throwing science out, but we have to have some clear understanding of where we can say, hey, we legitimately can say we don't really know a lot. And so that is, when I look at, when I hear people say, well, young earth creationism couldn't exist because, and then fill in the blank, and it's some interpretation of scientific data. I more and more think, how can you really be sure of that objection? And especially when we've got, when we balance that out with other ways of knowing, and other ways of ascertaining whether we think the Bible is true. So what do you think about that? Just the whole question of epistemological humility. And I think that's where you were going. I think that's where Phil was going. I'm going to stop talking and have you comment on that.
There's a whole lot of hubris today. I think people are horribly overconfident in what they think they understand, think they know. Science is a work in progress. Our understanding of our place in the universe is a work in progress. We've made a remarkable lot of progress in the last century figuring out our place in the universe. 100 years ago, the general consensus was that the universe consisted of the Milky Way galaxy. That was it. In 1924, Hubble changed all of that. Everybody believed in a static universe until 5 years later when Edwin Hubble again overturned that. And on and on and on it goes. And if you look at the history of science, huge amount of surprises. I mean, modern physics was birthed a century ago and in many respects replaced classical or Newtonian mechanics. But I think people today are making the same mistake they made in the past. They have this arrogance to believe that we in the 21st century have arrived at ultimate truth. And if the history of science is any indication, that's foolish. That is hubris. And I think there needs to be a lot of humility more expressed among astronomers and cosmologists and physicists today. I'm confident there's way too much confidence.
Christopher, I have a slight corollary to that question you were making. You made me think of a book you might be interested in. It was written by Werner Heisenberg, father of the uncertainty principle and contemporary with all the other physicists that were making these wonderful discoveries. He wrote a book called Physics and Philosophy, and he had a very insightful observation about the discipline of science. And he said that we only know the universe in light of the kinds of questions that we ask. So so we build so like a telescope is a question that we're asking about the universe. And you mentioned satellites and rockets, and it's interesting. He doesn't really go into this in great detail, but he does ask the questions that make you think about it. That our perception of the universe is seen through our technology, and our technologies are forms of questions to the universe. And so built into our questions are assumptions. But Heisenberg was very astute, I think, in observing that the nature of the universe, the way we know it, is based through the kinds of questions that we ask about it. It's a fascinating book. It's very easy to read. It's non-sciencey, but it's Physics and Philosophy by Werner Heisenberg, a great little book, and I think you might be interested in
wow,
it.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wrote that down because I love books like that. And
brilliant man.
Yeah, and by Heisenberg, that would be great. I mean, and Dr. Faulkner, you can comment on this. One example of that would be the Big Bang Theory. And growing up as a kind of an atheist that was going to be a cosmologist, I just assumed, okay, Big Bang happened. We've got that down. Not really realizing, like you said, that it's, less than a century before, when I was young, before Hubble, they didn't even know if there was anything beyond the Milky Way. But a lot of Christian apologists that I respect, Frank Turek, J. Warner Wallace, they will talk about the Big Bang and they will say, well, we know the Big Bang happened because the universe is expanding. And so when you extrapolate backwards, it's a singularity, the typical argument. And, a few years ago, I was thinking, how do we really know that? Just because the universe is expanding nobody was back there. I mean, why couldn't the universe have started expanding as a giant ball? If there's a God, and I think it's reasonable to believe there's a God, he could have created that way. So that would be one example of this kind of hubris that, like, okay, everything's expanding. That must have been a singularity. We just know that. Really, we do. How do we know that? So
the CMB, and you have to try to explain that, the cosmic microwave background. It's
Yeah,
Danny
how
has
do
a-
you explain the
Danny has a
CMB, which is
fascinating. Danny has a fascinating. It's in the book. Did you write it? It's in the book. We talked about it. I can't remember if I read it in the book or it was in our interview. But I love your idea about what the cosmic microwave background radiation might be.
What
Well,
is that, Dr.
that was a question I would get over the years. I started giving a talk about the Big Bang probably in the late 1990s. And I remember the first time I gave a talk on it, it was at a library in the town I used to live in. And this one fellow came up, Christian man, and he was probably a theistic evolutionist, probably a big banger for sure. And during the presentation, at the Q&A afterwards, he asked, well, and I brought up the CMB in my discussion, and he asked the question, well, if the Big Bang didn't happen, where did the CMB come from? And I told him, as in my style, I said, that's a very good question for which I don't have an answer. I wish I did. And I just tucked it away as one of those things. Well, just keep that in mind. I'll continue my story here. I came to AIG 9 years ago, and I came with a list of projects that I actually had written down, a list of projects that needed to be addressed and worked on. It didn't have to be me. It just had to be somebody in the creation science movement dealing with astronomy. And so one of the projects I began working on after I arrived was try to figure out what the biblical cosmology was. I read about this thing, the Rakia in Hebrew, introduced in day 2, this expanse or firmament in the King James expanse and more modern translations. And I was trying to figure out what this is. And so I spent quite a bit of time diving into this, talking to Hebrew people, studying it. And I eventually came to the conclusion that the expanse God made on day 2, expanded off the earth, is the space of the universe. That's my understanding. When God initially created in beginning of day 1, it was pretty small compared to day. It was all confined in a very small area, and outside of that was really nothing. And I mean nothing. I mean something less than nothing. No space either, which I don't know how I can't really comprehend that. So God expands this out on day 2, and then on day 4 he fills it. He makes it pretty clear 3 times in the day 4 account. He says he places the luminaries in the expanse of the heavens. The thing that, and I think that goes back to 3 times repeated Rakia and Shemayim, the expanse of heaven, because he equates this expanse with heaven in verse 8 on the day 2 account. So I think he mentioned it 3 times to make it clear to us, lest there be any doubt that where he put the luminaries on day 4 was in the thing he made in day 2. That further bolsters my conclusion that this expanse is the space of day 2. Here's the kicker. I'm writing this up. I thought through this. It took me weeks or maybe a month or 2. I'm writing this thing up, spending several days writing this thing. And one morning I'm coming into the office and I start to write, and suddenly something hits me a bolt out of the blue. The purpose, it says in the day 2 account for this Rakia, this expanse, is to divide the waters below from the waters above. The waters below being the surface waters on the earth. The waters above, well, it must be above whatever this expanse is. Well, I've already concluded the expanse is the space of the universe, what we call outer space today. So that leads me to the conclusion that there must be water at the edge of the universe. The universe has an edge. Since it's expanded off the earth, I'm going to suppose that we're roughly near the center of the universe. And these ideas are very foreign to cosmology today. First of all, the universe doesn't have an edge in most cosmologists' mind. And if it did and was finite, what's the probability we would be anywhere near the center? So most cosmologists and astronomers would dismiss my 2 conclusions there immediately. But the third one's even more important, because it suggests we've got the earth here, we've got the space here, and at some great distance, they've got this shell of water, and I think it's probably in liquid form. We can talk about that more if you wish to. And then it occurred to me that water being made of baryons, we call baryonic matter, must radiate. That's sort of guaranteed by the third law of thermodynamics. So if you get my picture here, here's the Earth. Way out here at the edge of the universe is a shell of matter that's radiating. I have no idea what the temperature is, but it's going to be radiating probably something in a black body spectrum, so that radiation is coming to us from every direction in space. And from the Hubble relation, I know that this is going to be redshifted because of greater distance. This is where the science comes in for the first time. The temperature of this thing is going to be cooled quite a bit. And I thought, well, we've known about this radiation field coming from the far reach of the universe since 1965 when it was published. So it just sort of tumbled out of it. I wasn't trying to look for an explanation, but that is my explanation as to what the CMB is. It's radiation coming from the water that God placed up there on day 2.
And what's interesting too, I think, is the current axis of evil problem in cosmology right now with the quadrupoles and the octopoles, about how the CMB within the CMB, there's alignment with our galaxy. And
the alignment, the axis of evil is aligned with the ecliptic, which is the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun.
Yeah,
it's inclined for about, and it's coincides for about more than 100 degrees, I believe. I have to look it up again, but it's a rather stark thing. And some of the other features of the CMB can be explained in terms of current cosmological models. But one feature that cannot be explained is what they call the axis of evil. They call it that because it has no explanation. And it's just interesting to them that it happens to coincide with the Earth's orbit around the sun. Now, they would think it's a coincidence. I'm looking at it and saying, well, maybe not. If this thing was expanded off the Earth, it might imprint something from that. Now, keep in mind, the sun didn't exist yet, so why in the world it would be aligned with the Earth's orbit around the sun would be a mystery to me. But at least it seems to be aligned with something local, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, let me say, Dr. Faulkner, I really appreciate you being with us and being part of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. I don't know if it was exactly what you were expecting, but hopefully it was enjoyable.
It was.
Do you have any, our time is up, but do you have any parting advice, knowing that we have atheists and Christians here, a word for either group or maybe both together? Do you have a parting word for us?
Well, I want to thank everybody for being civil and being kind. I kind of expected they would be, but many times people get together and they generate a lot of heat but not much light. And so I appreciate the attitude that y'all have, and it's encouraging to see that. I'm an easygoing guy, I think, but passions can run high, and so I appreciate everyone's attitude about this, that we can disagree without being disagreeable. But that's about it. I don't make apologies for who and what I am. I'm a Christian first and a scientist second, and I need to get my priorities straight. That's my worldview, and I know people may not agree with me on that, but hopefully they respect my approach.
I apologize if so much stuff in the book that we didn't even get to touch on. We just kind of focused on that one section. I really wanted to talk about aliens, and so maybe we can have you back sometime in the future and talk about that, or maybe one of your other books or journal articles. But thank you again. You've been a great guest. Appreciate your time.
And I just interviewed Danny. It's on my channel. We talked about Danny's new book that he collaborated with 2 backyard astronomer photographers. It's a wonderful visual tour of the universe, of our solar system and backyard astronomy, a heavens, a different view. And so Danny and I just had about an hour and 20 minutes, a wonderful chat with some graphics and pictures from the book. You want to check that out on my YouTube channel.
Well, Daniel, could you put that on our Friends of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, a link to that, or
I will.
Maybe just a video so that we can just click and watch it? And
I will do
again,
that.
Please follow our Facebook page, and also we'll have all the information up on the new book on atheistchristianbookclub.com. Thanks so much, everyone, and we will see you next month.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you. It's good to be here. That was fun. I'm glad I did it.